I did read was my copy of Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. As you can see here, I'm going to put a accoutrement right here because I don't feel like holding that book. So what can I say about this book? For starters, we'll get to the synopsis for those who aren't aware. The story is about a black man named Ike and a white man named Buddy Lee. Now, Ike and Buddy Lee, they are both convicted criminals. They have served their time, and they are in the, maybe we'll say the fall years of their lives. But despite that, underneath the surface of each of these individuals, that sort of violent component to their character is still there, although they have alchemated to not perusing it as much as in their past as criminals. So they're going to have to use it because both of their sons who are gay were married and both of their sons were subsequently murdered. So Ike and Buddy Lee team up together to solve their children's crime, their murder. And then they fall into like this web of I won't say if it's a conspiracy, but this web of just entangled complexity revolving around how, as Lauryn Hill says, the ones on top won't make it stop, so convinced that they might fall. So that's where the story is. I know that doesn't make sense to many of you. Just think about this. There's somebody at the top who's pulling all the strings that led just far enough down to where Ike and Buddy Lee's children were murdered. So here's the thing that I found about Razorblade Tears. I did enjoy the book, but I will say this. Now, I did not go into it necessarily thinking it had the storytelling complexity and required the same amount of bandwidth that it would take to get through a James Baldwin book. That was very much evident and clear when you read it, and it's not necessary to have been so. But I did think that there was probably a little bit more depth in terms of tackling LGBTQ issues or queer issues in the book. While those conversations were certainly there, what I found resoundingly at the end of the book is that this book is not necessarily for the community, although we can enjoy it as obvious. It's much more geared towards individuals who hold the mind frame, the stifled mind frame of individuals like Ike and Buddy Lee. Whether it is dealing with children, sons who are gay or daughters, or just in sort of addressing their own internal or external homophobia. So that's a lot of what I came away from Razorblade Tears digesting, is that it wasn't really calling to me personally, because we don't really dive really into the complex issues as it regards Ike's and Buddy Lee's sons themselves, having been gay, haven't gotten married, haven't ended up having a surrogate and having a child. That's just really the impetus for why this situation has occurred for these men. Although, like I said, the conversation is still there, it just doesn't deep dive into that. So we're not looking at the story necessarily through what I just kind of feels like the LGBTQ concerns or majority issues, because there's a lot more depth to it than this book goes into. But it's looking at it through, what's Ike's and Buddy Lee's conversation about when their son came out, how they responded, how they wish they responded. What is Ike and Buddy Lee's, what is the conversation or reaction they would have to being in a gay bar and happen to see two men kissing, and then reflecting that back on the fact that their sons were gay and were married. How did they once previously respond, and how do they change that? How did they evolve in their response? It even went into transgender character, and their skewered view of this character, or what they once thought of, you can say an ignorance lens, and how they subsequently look at it now, or how it has evolved. So that's how it really, to me, that's what I took from the book. Not necessarily looking at the characters who were LGBTQ community members or whatnot, but just how the world and family and friends and the outside world responds to us. That's how I saw it. And I don't think that didn't make it a bad book at all. I think it was a great book because it did invite conversations. It did invite those who have trouble understanding or just simply letting people be. It did invite the conversation together. On top of that, I think that for the majority, the book was absolutely predictable. There were not enough. I think that a lot of the characters, especially when it comes to the brute, brunt, and tumble characters, because this almost read just like an action film. You know what I'm saying? Not that means it doesn't have like a high grade, but it just kind of had that same pacing and speed and that amount of violence and destruction that you would see in like an action film. Now I'm trying to stay away from one particular term because I don't think that qualifies here. But for the most part, all the villainous characters played exactly their roles. Like I said, the brute, the brunt, the tumble, the gun swinging. There's the motorcycle guys on the motorcycles. Very much just par for the course. Although they had personalities and they had different names, they just played their role. And when you look at and examine like some of the points within the book that looked at who was the one pulling all the strings of the lower individuals, it was quite apparent because there was just too many clues to have given it. But I will say that doesn't mean that this is a mystery. It is a thriller, specifically speaking, but with it being so predictable, I had to look at with it being so predictable and then looking at where these conversations were going, as they weren't necessarily addressing some issues that I thought that they were going to address per se. I just kind of had to look at this book as just right on the precipice of just being a very good action adventure time. That doesn't diminish it at all, because I did enjoy the book, but like I said before, it didn't require the same amount of bandwidth like it would take to get through like a James Baldwin book, right? So, and that's fair. I think that's fair. But at the end of the day, I did pretty much enjoy Razorblade Tears.